Welcome, everybody. Really excited about this podcast today. Not only because Leigh's back. How you doing?
Well, I'm very well, thanks, James. And asked back for a second week. I'm the one that's surprised, to be honest. But I obviously did such a fantastic job last time that I'm back here again, folks. So good to see you all, and I hope I can do as well as I did last time.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And our guest today is Christian Lang. Christian has come on really to talk about the charity that he's MD of, which is STARS, which is all about helping youngsters through rugby, which really gels and knits with what we try to do here at Be More Rugby. So looking forward to getting to know more about that. How are you, Christian?
I'm very well, guys, and thank you very much for inviting me along. It's very generous of you.
No problems at all. Really looking forward to it. This is this is exactly what we wanted to try and help with this podcast. So but we'll kick off with a bit of a warm-up. I know Leigh is dying to tackle the tackle height issue that the RFU have dropped on the rugby world just in the last week. What's your thoughts, Leigh?
Interesting use of vocabulary. Tackled the tackle issue, and the RFU dropped. Yes, I think they have dropped something. Firstly, I think the RFU have got it wrong with the way that they've presented this rule change. It needed to be packaged significantly different and given a bit more thought about how it was going to be perceived once it was out there in the space. I think, firstly, when you're talking about a tackle line of the navel and below, yes, that is a tricky place to tackle for some people. It's not impossible, but it is going to massively change the game for some of the players out there. But I think the main problem is that when the RFU have disclosed this information, they've not really thought about the whole context and how that's going to be implemented by coaches and how it's going to be understood by players. There's no other fabric around that. But I understand now there's more information which is going to be forthcoming, which I expect is going to change our views significantly.
I'm skeptical in the fact that I think the RFU have made their decision and will be embarrassed to go back on it. But what about up at Chew Valley, Christian? Is there a buzz around this topic? Is there?
I think there's probably a buzz in every single rugby community in the country, isn't there, at the moment about this topic? And I've had playground discussions about it, rugby club discussions about it, freezing cold discussions, watching Bristol Bears play. There's an adjective you can add after that, which I won't say. I think it's hot stuff, right? And it's a really interesting issue. Tackle height, and particularly the lowering of tackle height, has been around and in discussion in the rugby forum actively since 2015, around that time. World Rugby were doing a lot of work in it, and there's been trials in different places. There's been adaptations in the French game. I don't think it's navel in the French game. I think it's sternum. Yeah, sternum, right? That's the bit. Like if you get punched between the ribs, the bit that hurts. So like sternum and below. And I think I completely agree with what Leigh said. I like the way it's been handled and delivered and kind of landed in the world and been released by the RFU is almost, for me, more of a concern than the issue they're trying to deal with. I think it's pretty hard to argue against trying to implement action which reduces head injury and all that comes with that. And there's interesting research and the World Rugby stuff, which sort of talked about, I think it was Science and Sport, and they talked about the red zone, the orange zone and the green zone for sort of impact on tackle height and head injury. And interestingly, sternum to waist is the green zone and waist down is identified as the orange zone. So, the RFU have come out and said it shows their continued commitment to player safety. And I think you can probably see that thread in what they're up to. But actually, if that was the primary drive, then maybe sternum to waist would be your approved tackle target area. But I think exactly as Leigh says, the way it initially dropped and the way they initially announced it was, it felt to me, personally, my opinions are my own or whatever you're supposed to say, but it felt like, there's been some bad stuff in the press. this doesn't look so great for us. We'll make a decision, and then probably I imagine somewhere someone in the RFU's going, we've not. This isn't going to come out great. Optics is a word that gets thrown around in marketing meetings often, doesn't it? And by people concerned in such things. And I think the optics on the way they dealt with it are fairly poor. I don't think you can argue with the principle of trying to improve player safety, trying to improve the sort of post-rugby life of players and the impact that rugby can have on that. I think how it's been dealt with, how the process appears to have been done, and what the information or lack of that they gave about how they're going to address this and deal with it is just dropping the ball is probably the fairest analogy there. I think they've done an awful job. I think today or definitely, because I sort of like everyone else, when it dropped last week, I don't think I got to the news until I think it was Tuesday last week. I didn't get to the news until 5 or 6 o'clock because I was doing other stuff, and I came to it. I was like, where's this come from? Where's the consultation process that's led to this? I mean, maybe they'd argue that the science existing in World Rugby and the discussion that's been going on in World Rugby means that there already is a forum, and they've just made a decision based on what's already out there. And in fact, that's the statement they've made, right? That based on our evidence and evidence elsewhere in the world of rugby, we've made a decision. But it just appeared to appear from nowhere, and then the statement was really kind of quite brutal. And we're doing this. It starts in July. Good luck, everyone. It seems to have been adapted a little bit on the the RFU website now. So they talk about how they're going to deliver a training program for coaches and players and officials, and it will be some face-to-face training, and then it goes on to talk about webinars, which we probably all got an opinion on, and then online resources, which are brilliant, and they're very well to have online resources for reference. But I'm interested to see how the next couple of weeks unfolds and the RFU's approach to how they are actually going to deliver this training to a level in which it has understanding in the game. July is all very well to make a rule change, but grassroots level, 9 weeks, maybe 8 weeks left of M&J's rugby. We can't start coaching this rule change in September if it's a rule change that's happened in July. We've got to start introducing this principle really soon, and there's nothing out. There's no guidance yet on what that looks like in coaching. Having spent some time with some coaches, and community coaches who've had no guidance whatsoever on what that looks like. I'll be really interested to see how the RFU is going to guarantee that this is rolled out so that it does actually make a change which improves safety. I think, if I'm being horribly pessimistic, I think what it's going to introduce is a period of absolute confusion for the beginning of next season, in which you lose coach confidence, you lose player confidence. Match officials at all levels are in a really challenging position because they've not chosen to change the rule. They're going to be expected to enforce it and to regulate it without appropriate guidance or training. It just doesn't feel like it's been managed particularly well.
I think I fully understand the importance of making the game safer, and the games, we've talked about this before. The game's a different game today than it was, years ago when we played. It's the same game. But it's so different at the same time. And I think the RFU have got a near impossible task to try and manage the safety of the game, especially in modern times. Certainly dealing with the data that can be gathered now through these incredible gum shields and skull caps and all the rest of it, the technology that's out there. But I think, exactly as you've just said, if it had been managed in a way that, look, we're looking to make the game safer, these are the things we're looking at, rather than we're Big Brother and that game that you all love, we're just about to change that completely and you're not allowed to play it anymore. And I think that's why, I just checked on there then, over 74,000 people have signed the petition to say, just, give this another thought at least. And then you've got so many other professionals coming out and saying it's not going to help. And I think that's a problem.
I think there's a bit of a danger there as well with the professionals, because, when you watch like the Premiership rugby, when you watch international rugby, and the Europeans, those games, generally there's at least a person getting red carded or yellow carded per game for a high shot. And in the professional game, there's a lot of teaching and coaching to be hitting around. Sorry, Lee. It's all right. That's okay. To be hitting your opposition, around the shoulder line, which is the legal height, if you like, legal maximum, right, and then tending to ride up to try and prevent offloads and all sorts, and handoffs, etc. So I think we've got to be really careful when we're trying to look at what the professionals are saying and how that actually reflects in the junior and the grassroots rugby game, because although it's the same game, they are played slightly different. But I think going back to Christian's point about the coaching, it's a huge challenge. I mean, as far as us here in the academy level, we won't be implementing any of this information, although we do coach the players to tackle low. We won't be implementing any of this new regulation this year. So it's all coming in the off season. So that's going to give us 4 weeks pre-season to try and catch up. And again, as Christian said, then there's going to be the huge challenge of the officials and how that's regulated. What does that look like on the pitch? Are we going to have yellow and red cards flashed all over the place? I probably don't think we are. But if you get the referee on the wrong day playing to the right rules, then, we could end up with 7 aside.
Well, if you look at it depends on how the referees are directed as well, right, by the IRFU. If the IRFU bring in direction for referees to be zero tolerance on this, like they did in 2017 with any contact with the head in the tackle was essentially a red card and it just ripped the game to pieces at all level, then exactly, like you say, 7 aside games are a realistic proposition. And I don't, it's all, I think there's we don't know what their intent or what went on behind the scenes before they dropped this and how much work they've done, because they haven't communicated that. And I think really for me that, you've got to accept that in any sport, regulation is going to change as the game progresses and more information about the impact of the game on health and well-being kind of comes into it. I think that's probably true of most team sports at the moment, particularly team sports with any form of contact, are really hot on this stuff. But I think communication is what, for me, the thing that I've found most interesting. And I'm not going to do inverted commas on my fingers because I think that says something about me. But that's an interesting approach to making a fundamental change to one of the kind of key elements of the game of rugby.
I've been watching rugby now with, and I'm very well aware that this law will come into to place at the moment. There's no idea that, or no thought, it seems, that it's going to be reversed or whatever. I'm watching games now, and I know it's the professional game, that's different. But I'm watching them thinking, if this does come into World Rugby, how's it going to change? They're talking about it being a better game, a faster flowing game, and all the rest of it. And also listening to professionals saying tackle choice is such a personal thing in the moment. If you take away some of the choices, what choices do you get? And I'm now looking at rugby thinking, do they mean it's going to be a faster flow game because there's just going to be more tries, more backs that are running past forwards because the forwards just haven't got that agility to be able to, and I know that, they can coach and they can work and they can train to get better at it. But I'm looking at it thinking, how's it going to affect? I can't see it affecting the game in any other way other than there's going to be a load more yellow and red cards, which slows it down in one respect, and a load more tries, which means the scores go through the roof. And then, I suppose I'm a purist. I do just like to see a lot of work on the ground. Do you know what I mean?
You're after a rainy day 3-all just to really. I think that if you're a player like Harry Randall, the Bristol scrum half, you are rubbing your hands at the moment because he is relatively short. He's dynamic, he's electric on the ball, and a lot of his work's done around the base of the scrum and making breaks, but in the 10-12 gap. So he's going to be in an absolute dream. And if you're peeling off the side or the back of a scrum as an 8 to try to hit Harry Randall at waist height and below, you're probably going to be best off lying on the floor and sticking your tongue in the air to stand a chance of doing it, because otherwise I don't see how you get down there. I mean, like I say, tackle choice should be actually individual. Look at the Henry Slade rescinded. I don't know if it was a rescinded at red card, but he's not going to face a ban. Right? I think the ban's been removed. And if you watch that footage in slow motion, you can come to the conclusion that had this rule applied at that point to that game, then he easily could have got to waist height and below to make the tackle on the Bulls 15, and we wouldn't have this issue. But watch the game in real time, and he arrives in that situation, and probably has less than half a second to decide where he's going for the tackle and how that's going to work, so I think exactly what you say, James, that actually what that turns into is that Henry Slade doesn't even attempt to make a tackle. And then you have a break from a defensive 22, which, I mean, I think the two players inside him were, I think he had a back row, and he had players inside him who also would have struggled to tackle that quite short 15 and get an effective tackle in on them. And so, that turns into a score. So I guess from a non-purist fan point of view, like, no one loves anything better than a well-worked try from the 22 that runs something for the field. But if that's happening every time, it's almost like sevens has come onto the 15 game in that way, that you're not going to get that. I'm also with you, James. I like a bit of attritional rugby where you kind of, you're into the dark arts of what might be going on the ground or in the maul, and what that produces. And I don't know. I find that it's a really. I mean, if the RFU's plan was to ensure that rugby was trending high on Twitter as the most discussed topic for a few weeks, they've absolutely smashed it, haven't they? I mean, they've done better than anyone else in rugby at making that happen. But it's a really interesting point. And I think the ramifications are going to be through every level and every facet of the game.
I guess last week, Dan Cottrell, he's already on all over it anyway. He's already set up coaching upgrades made simple, and he's discussing this exact topic. So if you're near Billingham RFC, Stockton-on-Tees on Monday the 13th of Feb at 7 p.m.
I'm not that far away.
No, go and get on that one and see what Dan Cottrell has to say on that, or at least just get on the Rugby Coach Weekly, and I'm sure he'll be flooding it with info. But Leigh, when we finally get back to Wimborne and can get on our pitch, do you even start to think about coaching this in with the lads? Do you talk about it to the lads? What are we going to do?
I mean, I don't think so at the moment. I mean, we work on our tackle heights anyway. I don't really want anyone going, above the waist. The waist is really the sort of maximum height I really want to be tackling at. However, I understand the challenges for the taller lads, particularly when they're trying to tackle a shorter person. As Christian said, you look at the likes of Harry Randall. Well, Harry Randall's got lots of different attributes. Yeah, being a huge smash it up ball carrier is not one of them. But we need to make sure rugby is still a game for all, and that everyone can play and everyone feels comfortable to play. So I think there's got to be changes in behaviour. I mean, again, let's use Harry Randall. Right, he's not going to jump up and try and tackle a 6'4" second row, right? He's not.
Have you not watched Harry Randall? That's pretty much Harry Randall's bread and butter. Taking
it's his thing, isn't it?
Harrison's game early this season, smashing Ben Earl was probably the highlight of the game for everyone. And Randall brought Ben Earl down.
But but he's got to work quite hard to get up around the shoulders on some of these big boys. So you have to, unfortunately, sometimes you've got to accept that you have to make the tackle. The tackle's going to be low, and that player might offload the ball. Yeah, but your primary decision making should be, how do I tackle that player? Again, I think it's been being a shorter in stature type person. I've always had to make tackle choices when I was playing, and you do get half a second, if that, to make those choices. My thought was always, right, let's make sure I tackle the player. If I think I can knock them back, or maybe they're shorter than me, some were, then I'll maybe hit them a little bit higher. But equally, the bigger boys now have got to think a bit more about it. They've got to bend at the waist and work a bit harder to tackle lower. And I don't think that's necessarily happening in the professional game. There has been a change, but I don't think the change in tackle height is significant enough. Thinking about the RFU, talking about the navel, my feeling is that's going to work its way up a bit higher, and we're going to end up somewhere around the rib cage, sternum area, as they were trialing in France.
Yeah, and it's been successful in France, right? If you look at you can look at international records since they introduced that rule for the French team. You can look at the performance of the French team in European games against English teams, and they're defensively strong. They're turning over the ball well, and they've got a really open and flowing game. So I suppose if that's what it brings to the Premiership, and as a Bristol fan, I would love to return to the days when we didn't just watch 80 or 79 minutes of defence and some interesting kicking options. Then I'm all for it. But for me, like I said at the beginning, the communication around it, the optics of the way it's been dealt with, I don't think are quite in tune with what the RFU perhaps were hoping to achieve and what they've done.
I think that was probably their biggest failing, but still, I think that one's we'll wait and see next year.
Well,
but,
we will wait and see, but I think there's plenty more to come on that subject.
Yeah, most definitely.
So I think warm up over. We'll crack on with our first half, and I'd like to introduce Christian Lang. Christian's teacher, been a teacher for 20 odd years, including assistant head teacher. He's got extensive experience in supporting children that have had multiple adverse childhood experiences, and a great understanding of the relationship needed to help them thrive. Last year, he joined Star Scheme as their managing director, and together with the team there, they are helping children that have had trauma as youngsters with the aid of the beautiful game of rugby.
Yeah, utilizing rugby home as I'm gonna shout out Wayne Sanford from Warlingham Rugby Club in the Croydon area, who introduced me to the term rugby home. I did say to him I'd steal it and sell it as my own, but I suppose just for this one time I will acknowledge that the genius came from him. But yeah, exactly that. So I went to university in Bath and trained as a primary school teacher, and my final teaching practice was in an area of South Bristol, which was an interesting kind of mix of affluence and deprivation, and it kind of sparked a bit of a passion really to kind of understand how to best meet the needs of the kind of range of children that I'd encounter in that environment. And then I spent a lot of my career trying to work in schools that presented certain and distinct challenges, and for the sort of last 13 and a half years of my teaching career, I worked in kind of quite a really challenging area in a really deprived area of South Bristol. And I suppose my interest in the childhood adversity and the impact that has on children's outcomes in life comes from essentially, being in a classroom or being in a school environment and seeing that, two children in the same class with the same provision, with the same, or what would appear to be the same starting points academically, learning at different rates for reasons that couldn't be explained academically, if that makes sense. It wasn't necessarily to do with resource or approach or relationship to the teacher, or all those things that we would sort of immediately stand out. And it sort of led me to learn about this world of adversity in childhood and the impact that has on neurological development, emotional development and regulation, and therefore the outcomes that kind of occur for these kids in later life. So when Star Scheme started, it was at Chew Valley Rugby Club, as James mentioned earlier, in the Chew Valley, south of Bristol. And essentially it came about as a result of Dan Wooler, who's the guy who started Star Scheme. He's our chair of trustees as well. And he had been part of a successful story for one of the young people who had been at the rugby club, who, it's fair to say that without rugby, his outcomes in life would have been far different. And it kind of now enabled Dan to start to think about, well, if this worked for said child, how many other age groups in our club have got this? Is it true of? And unsurprisingly, every age group could identify a child that rugby was the difference for. And then when you speak to other clubs, well, every club's got kids and people that rugby's a difference for. And I from watching playing, being cowardly enough to play rugby at school and not be very good at it, and then being a fan of rugby and go to university in Bath, you can't help but watch a lot of good rugby, as it was in the late 90s. No comment since then. And as you realise what rugby does, and everyone you speak to who's in rugby knows that person that without rugby would be somewhere less pleasant in a life, less fortunate. So what Star Scheme does essentially is build and repeat that story over and over. My interest in it is how we kind of bring the world of adverse childhood experiences and the kind of all the neurology of that and the science that comes behind that, which is starting to get a bit of a standing in education. Like it's shocking to think that really you'd imagine that's always been part of education, understanding how a child's experiences would impact on their ability to learn, for example. Like these adverse experiences can impact on a child's ability to focus, learn, understand language. So there's a key and an obvious link to education, but it's only really, I don't know, it's hard to know the pandemic, right? Has anyone else completely lost their sense of time? Like it feels like there was a life before the pandemic and since, but maybe the last 5 to 8 years, it started to become more prevalent. And really, you know, the pandemic kind of helped to probably highlight that it was a really key issue to address, because a pandemic is obviously an adverse experience for children. We didn't experience that as children. You know, all the children alive today pretty much have. I'd argue that kids born up to last summer were kind of born under the impact of a pandemic. So I was really interested to see like how that world of adversity and what I'd learned about it and how I'd applied it in school and begun to apply it kind of as whole school strategies and approaches to everything we did. Like, how could we address that differently? You know, what would have an impact in that? So when Dan had this idea of Star Scheme, through, you know, it's always who and not what, and, you know, through the child that he had experienced it with. Well, he'd come to the school that I worked at as a young child. In fact, one of the adversities he'd faced was his dad had been incarcerated and then was released and died in a police chase, and he had all that to deal with. And I was at the school and one of the leaders at the school when that happened. And you know, unfortunately for us in that school, it was the 4th of 6 parental deaths that we dealt with in a space of about 18 months. And so he was number 4. We were quite well versed by then on how we kind of help children to deal and process with grief. So, you know, because of my link to the child, and we employed that child's mum actually later in life, and she was still part of our school and part of Chew Valley Rugby Club, and she made the link and said, oh, you know, if we're going to put kids into this and try to make it into a scheme, you need to speak to the school I was at, and that meant speaking to me. And as soon as Dan explained what he was going to try to do, you know, and essentially what he explained to me is that we're going to make sure that we take away barriers for kids. So we're going to take away the barrier of not being able to get transport to and from every game and training session. We're just going to pay for that. I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. That'll make a difference. And we're going to make sure we build community, you know, and invite the parents along to be part of the rugby club. Oh, that's another brilliant idea. And we'll provide kit and all the rest of it. And I was like, this is ingenious, you know. And I was like, so how long are you going to do it for then? Like, you're just going to run it as, like, you know, most typically programs run 6 or 12 weeks, or, you know, you might get half a year out of someone if you know, speak really nicely to them. And he's like, well, until they're 18. And it was that's what got me. And I can remember exactly where I was. It was in January 21. We were still I think we were still in a lockdown then for a while. Definitely school wasn't fully populated. We had teachers kind of, you know, some working at home, some kids at home. And I remember where I was, because in the head teacher's office, because we were, as a leadership team, were taking it in turns being in, and I was genuinely sitting in the chair, my feet on the desk, which I suppose I probably shouldn't admit on something that's going to go on YouTube, but that's what I was doing. And I genuinely sat up and I said, do you know what you just said? Like, it caught me suddenly. Like, you say you're going to, like, work with kids from whenever they arrive at this rugby club until they're 18. So yeah. I was like, all right, I'm in. What do you need? And then we sort of spoke through things and ran a trial day at the school where he came in with a load of coaches and coached rugby. He said he tells his story slightly different from me. He says that I told him it would be 60 kids for across an hour, and that I kept him trapped in like a sports, you know, mugger, they call them, in like a sports court in the blazing July sunshine, and put 240 kids through. I'd like to put on record that it was 244 kids, and there was some shade. So it's now time to dispel the myth that I tried to kill him at that point. But, you know, we ran the kids, put it through, and I just sort of played the part of communicating between the rugby club and the families, and just got them to the club, and off we went. And what I witnessed kind of day in, day out then, from when the kids started in September of 21 at the rugby club, was just, like, frankly incredible. So, you know, one of my roles during, as one of the leaders in school, and particularly during COVID, when we had kind of restricted access and, you know, everyone had to stand 2 meters apart. Do you remember all that? And one of my roles, and in Bristol City Council, if anyone from Bristol City Council is listening to this bit, this can't be proven, was to spray paint, you know, like the lines and the dots for everyone to stand. And I just was merrily one day, like when lockdown was still things and we were still in place, and we were preparing to open the school, I was merrily just spraying my 2 meter dots. You know, I think I had music on. There was no one there. And then I realized I'd gone, like, all along the pavement. So, like, you know, and it said semi-permanent paint. I thought, how long could that last? Like, you know, 6 weeks, that's all we need it for. Still there now. Like, that paint is not coming up. So I don't know what part of semi-permanent is there. But, you know, I was doing all that. So I was stood in the road, is what we did. We couldn't afford traffic bollards for the school. So we used a more kind of expendable resource, which was me. So I stood in the middle of the road, trying to avoid getting knocked over, but greeting all the parents and the families, so, you know, keeping them chatting, which is a really key part of what we were trying to do as a school, to kind of engage the community and being part of the community. So these kids that I'm part of the Star, as it was then. Attending Chew Valley, getting to be part of rugby. They'd always sort of wave and say hello as they went in. But first of all, I noticed that the kids were kind of crossing the road at a different point. So they used to cross the road and like kind of walk through in front of me to the school gate, and then they weren't. And then they were coming up behind me. And then so they could talk to me about rugby. And that's like, I'm not talking like after 3 months, like week 1, we went to rugby on Sunday. We went to rugby on Sunday. It's like trying to avoid getting knocked over by a bin lorry. Let's see what we can do. Talked about just full of it and loved it. And off they went. And, in they go. And like every Monday, that was my thing then. Every Monday, kids coming in, we went to rugby, and the group grew. But the most amazing thing was watching the parents. So there were some parents, it was really challenging to enter that school building, like anxiety and other things going on for them, their history and past relationship with their own schooling. Challenging place to come into, right, a school. And suddenly these parents were also, because I've spoken to them about the scheme and got them into and sort of introduced them to, they were talking and making the like huge, not huge attempts, but like continually chatting and saying hello. And suddenly we had a subject to talk about, which wasn't, we need to talk to you about your child's behaviour, or I need to talk to you about this because about school, or they need to approach me because something's gone wrong at school. Actually, we were just talking about something nice they'd done at the weekend that they'd been involved with, that their child had been involved with, and that I had knowledge of. And it gave us a context. So suddenly I was having conversations with parents that I promise you, a couple of examples, like for the whole 13 years, I'd stood on that, and said hello to them and got no more than a nod. And suddenly I was having full-blown conversations and learning more about these families and the dynamic that I ever thought I would. In some cases, ever thought I would need to know that much. But you kind of find these things, and it changed for me in school, like the relationship with in some cases, some of the more challenging children. We had a context that we could talk to beyond what might be happening in school for them or in their life from in that moment. What it also gave me was, it was a great one for if something was going wrong for a kid. We had amazing school grounds. Let's get out in them and just utilize the space and the time. And, that might be kicking a football round, throwing a basketball. And actually, you can kick a football and kind of smash it a long way and keep going with that, right? Most kids can manipulate a round spherical ball that really easily, and that be that basketball, football. Now, rugby ball, you can have a go at kicking it, but it's a technique that takes some practice. And in a hyper vigilant, hyper aroused state, it's really hard to have the focus to kick a rugby ball well. But passing a rugby ball takes a bit of thought, and you can only do it so far. So it kind of gave a more controlled outlet. And there's something about rhythm, kids, when they're hyper aroused, when they flip their lid is a commonly used term. It's biologically accurate. Their kind of prefrontal cortex has gone offline at that point. They need rhythm. But rhythm is really, really key for these kids. Kids have encountered, actually, all humans, rhythm is absolutely key for. I mean, if you think back to a time in your life, perhaps when you felt angry, sad, super upset, like something like music can be really soothing for some people. Going for a walk is really effective. And there's other factors like the fresh air and hopefully the vista you're looking at. But actually, the rhythm of walking is a key part of that regulation. So suddenly these kids that were kind of going to rugby on Sunday, I can now toss a ball backwards and forwards with them, and throwing a rugby ball backwards and forwards is really rhythmic. You just get in, it's a whole body motion, and you cross centre lines, you engage central nervous systems, loads of receptors. You start to give stimulus and input to the brain, which isn't this face. We all know this face that kids or adults have made, and you start to get into this regulation. You don't need to talk, but you do need to concentrate, because if someone is rubbish at rugby and me throws a ball at you, you've got to be ready to do something magical and catch it. So, you've got to concentrate, but you don't have to communicate. And that, I found there's suddenly this magical communication and like regulation tool for these kids who perhaps didn't always have that. And it wasn't always when things went wrong. Like often, just go and rock into them in the morning, like, do you want to go and toss a ball around? Like, yeah, and you get 3 or 4 of them, and in that 2 minutes of throwing a ball around with them, I learned about everything that was going on from that day, how they felt, where their state of mind was, what might need to be done just to kind of bring them to a place where they're ready to learn. So started to see massive, massive impact. And I suppose my story is that I sort of phoned Dan and was like, right, this is working brilliantly. What's next? Like, Chew Valley's cool. Where else can we take this? And he'd always had a plan to grow it more, and I kind of got involved with that. And then about this time last year, much to the delight of my mortgage advisor and my wife, I was like, I'm resigning from my career, my established career in education, and the steady wage and the comfort of a great pension that comes with education and all those things, and going to resign, and I'm going to go and run the Star scheme as of sort of I work out the school year, but then I'm going to run a star scheme, and my wife said, "Brilliant, you've got a passion for it. It's great. Is the funding in place for that to be real?" I was like, "No, there's no funding. No, we haven't got the money for that." And the chat, "No, there's no way." She said, "Well, have you got a contract, and a plan?" No, I'm not. No, we haven't got anything. Not got anything grown up, but we have got the fact that we know this works. Well, I'm just completely madly passionate about how brilliant and how much fun it is. So I'm going to go and do that for a job, and fast forward a year, and it totally is what I'm doing for a job. And you'll be very pleased to know that we've just about got enough funding to pay for me, which is great, because the prospect of standing on a street corner and singing was probably more likely to get me in prison than anything else I've done in my life. And the star scheme is what I live and breathe and work at every day. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if that was a history of me or a history of the star scheme, or a little bit of the two combined, but it's a bit of an overview at least.
It certainly was passionate. I know that much, and I fully understand why you've got involved in it and why they wanted to work with you at the same time. So as far as rugby goes, we're all rugby fans. Where did rugby come to your life? Was it just as a supporter, early days?
No, early days. So
school, but...
yeah, second. I grew up in Taunton in Somerset, so we kind of secondary schools where in the late 80s, 90s is where you first encountered rugby. Rugby didn't exist in primary schools really in those days, and really without some good direction, rugby doesn't exist enough within primary schools at the moment. So secondary school, yeah, and where I had two super passionate and enthusiastic Welsh PE teachers who taught us all to play rugby. And I'll be honest, I loved every minute of it. I wasn't great, far too cowardly to be brilliant at a tackle. But the good news was that at 11 and 12, I was quite short and quite tubby, so I was a great hooker. And I played in the front row, played a flanker, played at fullback for a while, got my testicles stood on by a boy who was much bigger than me. Brilliant tackle though, like game-saving tackle, so I'll take that. And loved every part of it, but knew that probably, felt that I maybe wasn't brave enough to be part of it. Now looking back now, experience is an amazing thing, but I so wish that I could go back and have a word with myself and say, everyone, when someone's charging down you, everyone's scared, you idiot. Just apply the tackle, use the technique. In those days, it was like, that you were targeting navel down. That's what we were always taught, and pump when you got the ball. If you need to, pump your knees, because it's going to make the tackler think twice. And I wish I could have gone back and told myself that, and had someone to kind of make that normal and make that usual, because I think I would have continued to be involved and love the game. But so I didn't continue to play it really beyond, I don't know, probably year 10, year 11, but continued to go and watch. So lots of my friends were super keen rugby players, a few of them represented England schoolboys and Somerset and stuff like that. So it was always really good fun to go and watch. And Taunton Rugby Club always had a good, setup for us to go down and watch it. There was definitely no underage drinking. That wouldn't have happened. But we could always go and get a burger for a good price, and it was, somewhere to go and watch. So going to watch games was always easy. Then I went to university in Bath, and he's my mum's cousin, but I call him my uncle. My uncle ran pubs, and one of them was like the other side of the weir from the Wreck. So, I quickly established that I was really good at spending all my student loan and my money far quicker than I think even the student loans company would have expected. I mean, I think at one point they might have suspected that I'd been robbed because it disappeared so quickly, but I can say I wasn't robbed. So I had to get a job, and it made sense to work in his pubs. And I used to love, like, rugby days were an absolute dream. The pub was probably no bigger than the room I'm in now. It was it's called the Rummer. It's the tiniest little pub, but you get a couple hundred people in there, and just in and out of the streets. We used to have to go out of the back door, like behind the cellar door, to get into the street, to walk around to collect glasses from the front half of the pub, because you just couldn't get through the pub. And it filled with fans. And what I loved about rugby, particularly having played football and coming from like a football family, is that on football days, and my dad played at Plymouth Argyle, and on football days if Plymouth Exeter back in the day, and probably still is a bit tasty, but there were Plymouth pubs in Plymouth, right? And away fans would never, you just wouldn't venture in there. And in Bristol now, you know, Bristol City in the south, Bristol Rovers in the north, there are Rovers pubs and City pubs where you wouldn't mix. But working in that pub and being around Bath rugby fans, and the days that always stood out for me was we had above the bar, we had a Leicester Tigers hand embroidered bar stool that someone had stolen from the sort of the equivalent pub in Leicester, and in the equivalent pub was a Bath rugby, you know, that had been stolen, because back in those days it was Bath Leicester was the rivalry.
Yeah.
So on Leicester days it would be like twice as busy as every other home game, which was busy, and it would just be pure joy, like everyone, you know, fans from both teams mixing, having a laugh, having a few pints. You know, we'd sell, you could never pour enough pints in the time. If we could have started a month before, we'd still be running out of pints in those days to pour them, you know, in glasses. But the atmosphere was incredible, and we used to literally, you know, like once, you know, if it was 3 o'clock kickoff at 5 to 3, the pub, it's like, you know, someone would have pulled the flush, the pub would empty, and they'd all go off, and we'd literally just, you know, pile the glasses in the washer, lock the pub, and run across and watch the game as well. And then 5 minutes before the final whistle, nip back to the pub, get it all open so that the end of it could happen. So I was around rugby and watching rugby and being part of that kind of game day atmosphere, and it was pure joy, to be honest. It was a huge amount of fun. And, you know, at the end of it, I was getting paid, and that was really helping the bank manager understand that I was still alive and hadn't been robbed. And it was, you know, to get paid to be in amongst that atmosphere was brilliant. You know, being at Bath and being at university, there's a lot of rugby going on, a lot of friends who are playing rugby, again, a lot of opportunity to kind of mix with rugby players and be around them. And it's just, I found myself pulled to the kind of social element of, and the family, the tribe of being in and around rugby. And I think that's what stood out for me, and that's what, you know, brought it to me. Like when I said earlier about, you know, the idea of rugby home, like that, when he said, I totally got that, even as just, you know, just a fan and now a rugby parent. Like, I get what rugby home is. I felt part of something bigger than standing in a pub trying to endlessly pour. I mean, you know, pouring pints of Guinness and doing a shamrock. I don't even know if I don't think they still do shamrocks in the top of a pint of Guinness anymore. But
Well,
you know,
not around here anyway.
well, I don't know if I've still got the knack. Maybe I'll bob up one day and we'll have a go at it. But you know, feeling like you're part of something bigger is what rugby is to me. You know, and I think that, you know, look at how Treads kind of feeds through the game. Well, then it's obvious that that's going to produce community and family, and that's what I loved about it, and still that's what I absolutely love about it now. I love the game. I watch it with my wife often on, you know, if it's an away game and it's on TV, we'll watch it, and she's still at times entirely baffled by some of the kind of the regulation rule and the detail of it. And I, being a bit geeky, I quite like the detail of, you know, the laws and the regulation. Maybe it's not geekiness, maybe it's the need for someone to try to corral me and hold me in place. It might be that, but you know, I like watching all that and being part of it. And it just, well, I hope you can see, it's just joyful being around it, isn't it? And being part of it. And weirdly now, I happily take my kids to go and watch Bears games. And it's not even a thought. It's like a fun thing for us all to go and do. Going to watch football games in the same stadium, in the same seats, is a very different experience, which I'm less comfortable. And that's nothing to say about, you know, the atmosphere at the ground is great. But the tribalism of football is less attractive to me as a model that I enjoy being in, that I want to present to my kids, than the community, which is rugby. You know, and I think, yeah, that's where rugby came to me at that point. But rugby stayed with me because of the community of it. And I think, I mean, if nothing else, if I've went to university in Bath, moved to Bristol, and I've never really left Bristol. I live in Portishead now, which is, you know, just outside of Bristol. There's no point supporting a football team in Bristol because you're not going to enjoy yourself very much.
Yeah, Dan Carter echoed that last week. Sorry, Dan Carter. Obviously, Dan Carter.
Wow, I mean that's
Dan
Yeah, he's next week.
Yeah.
Next week, James. Yeah.
Dan Cottrell. Yeah, Dan Cottrell said last week. But so I've got a son who plays football. Just to lay my cards out, I've mentioned it on the pod already. He's up at in Gloucester at university up there. But even though he's part of the university team, he's playing for a club, a local club as well. His going through the university system, his social side has been more with the rugby side and the rugby guys that are there, because he said it's a bit more, like you said, community, a little bit more family. Of course, it's a little bit, perhaps a bit more drinky certainly at university, but he said there's something about it that's just it's a closer knit than perhaps the football side is.
I think that whole principle of home, it's rugby home. I don't know. I mean, full disclosure, both my children play football as well. Yeah, my daughter's a really accomplished footballer and far better than I ever was. She's far better than I ever was at most things. That's probably true of both of them. But that it's the home that makes a difference. I never felt home in football. I loved playing football, but never that sense of home. You might have had it in a team, like in the team you were in at whatever age group and whatever stage you were playing, but not as a club necessarily. And I think that in rugby you get it instantly as a club. If you speak to who do you play for to a kid, like if I coach girls football, you speak to the girls and they'll tell you I play for this team under 12s. They'll tell you who they play for as a team. But like I said, in my daughter's team, there's her and two others who play for my football team and the same rugby team. And when they talk, who do you play for at rugby? North Bristol. They don't give you any more detail. Like it's not about I play for this pit of North Bristol. I play for North Bristol, the club North Bristol. That's who they're part of, and that's not come from me. I haven't pushed that. There's more of a community in rugby, and I work in rugby now. There isn't that. That's straight from them. Who do you play for? I play for North Bristol. There's no detail in it, because they're part of the community of the rugby club, and that when you're there is likely to be hanging out with the under 14s, under 16s girls, and spending time and being in that multi-generational environment that creates as they are with their own team. And there are also, girls that are kind of currently under 11 who are still playing mixed, who are looking to know what's it going to be like next season. They're kind of interacting with them as well. That whole community is ready-made to support them and kind of keep them engaged with the game.
Do you think, and Leigh's an ex-teacher as well, now head of the academy here at Wimborne. Do you think there is something in rugby that attracts teachers to rugby? And I know it's a community thing, and I know teachers are all about helping groups of kids, and I'm sure it's probably the same in other sports as well. But is there something that I know there's similarities in all these things, but what is it about teachers coming into rugby as international coaches, as well as local coaches, as well as running charities and all that sort of stuff?
I think there's just the desire to try and help and improve the kids, help them try and become the best versions of themselves they can be. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. And I think also, I suppose, there is a benefit to have already been in the teaching environment, because you're used to dealing with groups of kids. You're used to looking for different triggers, how you can inspire them, what things turn them off. So let's not do that. Let's do this activity instead. So I think we as teachers are given a bit of a leg up, a head start, if you like, on the coaching ladder. And interestingly, that's something I was listening on with on a Dan Cottrell podcast, talking about how coaches at a lower age group, so let's say the 6s, 7s, 8s, that sort of group, a lot of the coaches they struggle, first of all, to understand how to deal with those kids. And they were particularly talking about coaches that were either in the professional game or were just coming to the end of their sort of playing time, and trying to look for coaching opportunities, in the adult game, and saying that they'd missed the opportunity to coach kids, and they didn't have that affinity, that empathy with them. So it's really quite interesting, that podcast. Anyway, I'm digressing here. Yeah, I think anyway, teaching, I think there are similarities. There is a reason why teachers get involved with rugby, and I think it is because just trying to or the desire to want to make those kids the best they can be.
Yes, certainly. We're yet to every club we've walked into to work with and introduce Star Scheme to, when we go into a committee meeting, or it might be a committee meeting and the volunteers who feel they're going to take Star Scheme on, the first question I ask is, where's the teachers? Who works in schools? Because you're going to get one or two hands every single time, and I'm not, and you kind of, it's reassuring. Okay, excellent. Well, it's really likely to succeed because these guys, exactly like you say, Leigh, they've got already the understanding and the desire of making and improving those children to be the best that they're able to be, and I think that's I completely agree. I think that's what attracted that, and the fact that it comes with a nice set of, like, the respect model and the regulation in rugby is really reassuring as a teacher to know, to know that when something goes wrong in rugby, that the respect will be there for the coach and the referee, because that's implicit to the game. It's the fabric of the game. It means that for me, and actually, like I say, like, coaching girls football is very similar. It's like football for grown-ups. It's, you kind of get to just have a conversation about the content rather than the context of the behavior. You want the kids are going to enjoy it, and things are going to be loose at times, and that's really important, I think. But it's really nice to know that you're going to come and just coach, because in rugby, they know that turning up and putting the effort in and listening to the adult or the authority figure, whatever, however you want to term it, is kind of part of the game. It always has been for them. That therefore you kind of maybe not coming, like perhaps in your school day you've had to be responsible fully for that part as well. So to come to an environment where you just get to teach the content and just get to see the progress in the kids and just get to realize success with them, that's really attractive for teachers, I think, to have that outlet. And for me, as I went into sort of school leadership and spent less time in the classroom and directly with children every day, it was a really awesome outlet to be able to work as a coach and just enjoy the time with the kids, learning something and developing something with them, and then being part of that was with no paperwork marking or whatever else might come with it, just being in that world and, like I say, working with the kids, improving them. I think that's what the attractive feature is.
So tell us about Star Scheme then, Christian. It started at Chew Valley. It's still quite in its infancy, really. It's what, 2 years old?
Well, this is our second season.
So you started in Chew Valley. So how are things going at the moment?
Very, very well. Yeah, very well. So continue to be there in Chew Valley, and working with, the core of those children that we started the project with are still there. There've been some coming, some goings, as you would have in any rugby club and rugby team. So that one's still going really well. We're launched and active in 14 clubs now across Bristol and the Worcester region. We're just kind of starting to branch out into Bath, and we're partnering with the Matt Ratner Rugby Foundation, and launching a project in Croydon, which we've imaginatively behind the scenes called Project Croydon. Sometimes we refer to it as the Croydon Project. I know, if this goes wrong, I'm thinking marketing's probably where I should be. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It just came to me. It came to me and Sean Morgan, the CEO of Matt Ratner. We had an inspirational moment when we came up with that name. But we're launching with them, and we're hoping to work with 3 clubs initially in the Croydon borough, up to 5 by the end of the season, and then continue to kind of grow in that area. Southwark Rugby Club in South London, they've come on board with us this week as well. So we're acquiring clubs left, right and centre. Eastleigh are interested, we're in conversation with them. Salisbury Rugby Club. And what's really amazing is we spent a lot of time, particularly at the end of last season, beginning of this season, starting to go out and make contact with clubs and find them, and find those people that have a similar mindset, and start to introduce Star to them as a possibility. And where we are now is actually clubs are approaching us, for our website. There's an inquiry function, and that people are coming to us to ask us to go and work with them. And it feels, one of the people that works with us, who's Dan, who set it up, his wife Georgie, said it feels like it's just about to explode. Like it's just kind of, that balloon is really pressurized, and it's about to kind of launch in lots of directions. So from that side of things, from the kind of growth and the expansion and where we are, it's absolutely incredible. In terms of the kids on the ground, I think it's indicative that the lowest level of concern for me is the children and the young people involved in the charity, and it's not because I don't care, it's because I'm so secure with the experience that they and their families are getting and the impact that therefore it's having, that it doesn't feel like something that I have to worry about. I have concern for it, and I'm continually looking to kind of see, is this to the level we want it to be? Is this an experience which is positive and engaging, and is going to guarantee like lifelong participation in rugby in one way or another for these people? But I'm not worried about it. I know that the work that grassroots rugby clubs are doing and community rugby clubs are doing is just incredible. Like there's very few clubs we're going into and describing what it is we do as Star Scheme, where they go, well, we've never heard of that. We've never done anything like that. Like most clubs are like, oh yeah, we do loads of that. but we wish we could. And it's like, in some, if one of the clubs we're working with at the moment, that we are basically just going to provide that link between getting the kids from the school where they're engaged into the local club. It's that simple in some clubs, and because the world of grassroots rugby and the world of rugby kind of does these things, it makes sure that those kids that perhaps aren't able to provide it for themselves get kit, and not just kit from sponsors, but clubs having boot exchanges where you just put one pair in, take another pair out, and it's subtle, and it's kind of comes from a place of love, and it just means that kids are able to engage. Like that's a great thing that's going on, and it's going on at every club we go into. Like when we were first forming, how do we present star schemes? Like, well, we'll have to tell them about that. This amazing idea we've had of boot exchange, and you're kind of like in the first few, like, yeah, we do that. Yeah. What about a kit exchange? Yeah, we've always done that. Like, yeah, okay, so that's no longer a thing we have to present to you. Like, you clubs have presented far better ways of doing it back to us. So it's growing, it's succeeding. We're getting more and more children involved. I think it's slowly becoming more and more known in the community of rugby. I often voice it as being a no-brainer for anyone that might be a stakeholder or be interested in it. For the schools, essentially we go to schools and say, would you like some free rugby provision? From, in some instances, from the local professional club community foundation, and then would you like us to provide grassroots sport for some of your most vulnerable children and ensure that the families don't ever incur a cost other than their time to accompany their child and enjoy it for the rest of their childhood? We yet to come across many schools and go, no, thank you. No, we're quite happy, thanks. Those most vulnerable kids can wait. No one in the world is thinking that. And we're going to grassroots rugby club and saying, that amazing work you're doing, would you like some support and a bit more funding to make sure that you can do it, even more of it? That's a no-brainer. And to go to the community foundations or go to people like the RFU and say, we can help to formalise and mobilise that already existing volunteer network and grow it, and we can up participation in the game by targeting and introducing the game to communities, communities within communities who don't access it. It's in some areas of the country, in some communities, rugby isn't played, and there isn't really a local professional club or a Nat 1, 2, or 3 club that is present, and therefore you can understand the lack of rugby. But like we're doing this in Bristol. We're doing this in the southwest, where we've got Gloucester, Bath, Bristol, Exeter, that have got, geographically maybe it's a large area, but rugby is prevalent in the southwest, and we're still engaging children within communities for whom rugby isn't a part of their diet of sport. And then we introduce it to them, and for many of the kids that we kind of target, and we identify kids in discussions with schools. It's schools that give us the beginning of the kind of idea of which kids in their cohorts would be really good to work with and would benefit from it. And we run the sessions in school, the coaching sessions, so that we can see which kids really have an aptitude for it. We're not going and finding kids who might have suffered adversity in their life, who've got no interest in rugby, and dragging them to a rugby club and pinning them there because we paid for it. The thing about this is, we say that it's got to be an exceptional experience for the kids, right? It's got to be not just as good as, but exceptional for these kids and their families. And that means they've got to love it, and not love every minute of it. No one loves hands so cold you can't undo your laces, but you can have the enjoyment of the game, right? And that enjoyment of the game and enjoyment of the experience is key to what we're doing. So we get that identified from the school, who those kids are. We pair them with the clubs and support the clubs. And it just, then, to be honest, we don't sit back, because we've got to be involved in keeping it going. But it's rugby that does the work of enabling these children to process trauma, to overcome adversity, to reverse kind of outcomes which would otherwise be true of them.
I was going to say, because here at Wimborne we do our best as well, helping kids that come along that perhaps haven't got the fees or the ability to pay the fees or buy kit or anything like that. And we do a lot of what you're saying, but having the ability to engage with the community is something I think every club can do better, always. But if a club comes to Star Scheme and says, want you guys involved, want to be part of this system, who do they work with?
What, who they work with from Star
with
Scheme?
from Star Scheme?
Yeah, so there's not very many of us at the moment. The plan is it will grow. So the plan is that we'll have like regional representatives, who will kind of the clubs in that region will communicate directly to them. Now we've got one incredible human called Sian Morgan who's agreed to be regional sort of manager. We called it. She hates the title, but of the Bristol area, but currently is running Bristol and Worcester. Will undoubtedly sort out the clubs in Bath. So we're definitely overstretching her. But so they'll encounter myself in the first instance, like generally when we're kind of explaining what a Star Scheme is and how it works and what it's up to, it'd be me, or it might be Dan who set the charity up as one of us too. Then in terms of the day-to-day running, it'd be myself, Dan and Sian at the moment. That's the kind of Star Scheme team that are delivering this. What we do is when we work with clubs, we ask that there's someone within that club who's going to be, or people within that club who are going to take on the role of leadership for Star within it. So the ideal is that isn't somebody who is already a grassroots volunteer at that club, although it often is because they're the people who are most passionate in it. But that we want to build a wider volunteer network, and we ask for someone to be that kind of star, or that people to take on that role of star leadership, because it needs to be, as you say, like I think as you're alluding to, it needs to be visible at club level. Like we need to know that who is it at Wimborne Rugby who represents Star and stands for the Star Scheme and celebrates what it's about and ensures that the transport for kids is sorted and that they're going to get fed after the game and that they know where they're going to be and that mum, dad, carer of the child knows where to turn up with when, and that might be with the transport, and that same Star leadership role ensures that we've got a kind of a wider bank of volunteers who we call them family support volunteers, which again, I'm pretty good at naming things and coming up with creative names, and what they do is they support families. So the intent would be that perhaps in the under eights there's some parents who are already there on a Sunday stood there, right, who are going to look out for new parents, and they may or may not be Star Scheme kids. We're not going we don't tattoo the Star Scheme children. We've looked into that. It's definitely illegal, and we don't dress them special in any special way. They're part of the club. I say we introduce them to the club and support them. We don't place them at the club, right? But the family support look out for those new parents, and they do this incredible thing called being human. And they talk to them, and they welcome them in, and they share a cup of tea. And in some clubs we have budgets for a cup of tea, because some clubs, and I don't, some clubs are like, right, cool, we can cover cups of tea for people, that's not a problem. Other clubs want to know there's a fund for it, and that's cool. However a club wants to run Star Scheme, we'll support them to do that, to achieve the goals we're up to on the principles that we've got based. But the family support are there to make sure. So we've got volunteers for that. And then what we do then is we support those. That's the Star leadership role within the club, to make sure that first of all they have all the resources they need to make Star run successfully, that they have the support they need, because they're going to come across challenges which may not be a usual part of being every day as a volunteer in a rugby club. And then we provide training to them in the world of ACEs and attachment theory and early childhood trauma. We kind of give some base training in that to them, to the coaches, to the family support volunteers, so they have an understanding of the world that they're operating in. And that's not to say, they go in and they direct conversations at the Star kids using the hints and tips that they've got from the training. It's not about that. It goes back to that idea of being human. If we've got a better understanding of what might be happening for someone and why that means that it appears as it does, we've got a far better chance of actually helping the situation rather than making the situation worse or blowing it up. Like in the coaches training, one of the things we talk about is how you use your voice. And it's there's a good place for a raised voice on a rugby field, because it's quite a big space. But you'll see the most accomplished coaches, and I'm sure this feels for you too as well, that will have a signal, be it a whistle or whatever they do. And I've got one guy like waves a rugby ball in the air, which at first when I watched it, I was like, how are you expecting that's going to? Because the kids are used to it. He raised it, and they were like, oh yeah, we'll go and see him because he's waving a rugby ball in the air. Like, how they know? But they just know, right? So we talk about the use of voice, because a child that's feeling anxious is to use neurological terms, is hyper aroused, is going to have an interesting response to a raised voice, particularly if we consider that child might have encountered some sort of domestic violence, abuse, in which volume and a raised voice was there, or any trauma that's included kind of raised voice and the violence that can come with a raised voice. Now, I'm not saying that rugby coaches are shouting violently and aggressively, but that, you know, the child when hearing that and hearing that stress input isn't going to reasonably think, oh, I wonder if they're angry, or are they just raising their voice to get my attention? They're going to hear the raised voice, and that's going to trigger that stress response. But knowing that as a coach, right, knowing that could be true of some of our star kids, but also of all children, means you change your approach and you get to a wave rugby ball, or you blow a whistle, or whatever it is that the coach chooses to do to raise the attention of a child. Is, you know, just little things like that make the difference between a kid that's disengaged or terrified, or, you know, some of these kids will have that stress response, and all children will have that stress response to a raised voice. And then becoming used to it isn't them no longer having a stress response. That's them having a resilient response from their parasympathetic nervous system, which calms them. So they get the stress happens every time. It's just the calming happens more efficiently, and that's kind of huge neurotypical development. But for kids who haven't got that neurotypical development, particularly not children who haven't got a neurotypical parasympathetic stress response, they stay in that aroused state, that kind of, maybe it's fear, maybe it's excitement, but they stay there for longer. You know, something as simple as raising your voice to shout across a field to attract the attention of a child who might be about to do something seriously dangerous, is an appropriate time, right, to raise your voice, could have quite big ramifications. So it's not about we don't do that, because sometimes to say you don't instantly kind of, it's like saying do not tackle, you know, above the waist, isn't it? You know, you instantly create you take away a load of choices, and you also introduce a load of choices which are really hard to make. So we don't say don't shout, because maybe sometimes you're going to, but be aware of what that shout was. Because it might be that from the shout comes oh, I had to raise my voice then, that was loud, wasn't it? All right, is everyone okay? Like, I had to raise my voice because, you know, James was about to make a tackle or about to do something that put him at risk. So I just wanted to stop that situation. So is everyone okay? James, don't worry, you know, I'm not angry, you know, there's no anger. I'm just trying to keep you all safe. Right. Well, actually, what I'd like to do is, you know, look at that situation again. Let's set up in a game situation and look at what the alternatives are, you know, and it turns into a coaching point. So we provide the training to enable that, not to give a script, although we probably would have a few things not to say. You know, we can all guess what they are. But we don't have a script, but we have an approach, and we have an understanding. And, you know, the greatest threat to us all as a species is ignorance, isn't it? And an acceptance as ignorance as fact. And, you know, maybe we could roll this all the way back and apply it to the you know, tackle height. The great thing about social media is seeing the kind of ignorance respond, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely awesome. Someone who remembers watching the World Cup final in 2001 and since had no engagement rugby has a very, very solid opinion on whether tackle height should be raised or lowered. But you know, if we combat the ignorance around what might be going on for these children and these people, because, you know, the reason we like to engage adults is adults are essentially just children in bigger bodies, right? So we can apply the same principles to us all. The reason we learn and we educate the volunteers, the coaches, and the volunteers in that world is so that the community that we exist in the world of rugby is a far more understanding community, and with further understanding just comes greater success for everyone.
I absolutely, I think it's safe to say everybody here would be 100% behind you, because being a coach, being a manager, working with kids is all about how you coach rugby. We're a community, we look after each other, you know, the support comes, but it's those little details of, you don't know what that kid's been through and how would that affect, and that sort of stuff, which is massive. But I am going to blow half time on this, because we have to have a half time somewhere, and unfortunately we haven't got all night, which I'd love to. So halftime announcements, everybody. We're trying to spread, trying to help grassroots. If you are a club and you have something to promote, shout about, need some support or some help, please get in touch with us on info@BeMoreRugby or any of the social medias, and ask. We're happy to talk about it at halftime, but this halftime can't go past without the announcement of the star scheme. So please, if you want to help, if you feel you need help, if you've been listening to this podcast and think, actually, you know, our club's missing out, or some of our boys and girls are missing out because we haven't got this in our club, get in touch with Star Scheme. They're on the internet, www.starscheme.co.uk. email them at info@starscheme.co.uk. Go on the social media channels. Instagram is star.scheme. And I know they're on Facebook. And what's your Facebook, Christian? Christian's frozen. Sure Christian will be back shortly anyway. But yes, get on. We're big in the States at the moment. Even if it's a club that is out of the reach of Star Scheme, then get on and donate, support in every way you can. I have to be honest, when I started the whole Be More Rugby idea, my desire was that it would help support youngsters that had barriers to rugby be able to get into rugby somehow. So to find and I will shout out Georgie, because
she's incredible
following, and it was a comment from her that turned into a conversation that has turned into this podcast happening. So Georgie, thank you so much. Yes, you absolutely.
We're thinking of sending her out on like the professional fishing circuit, because she's like 100% strike rate. She's incredible.
I would. I would.
Yeah, I mean, not even Chris Robshaw is safe from Georgie on social media. It's incredible the return she's got.
So Georgie, thank you. And if anybody gets contacted by Georgie, engage. Honestly, I'm over the moon that Star Scheme exists, because it's given me peace of mind.
Wow.
But anyway, on to our second half. This is where we talk about exactly what we're here about. This is the ethics, the ethos, how rugby helps us. Christian, we start the second half with a question. What does rugby mean to you?
I mean, it's a great question, right? I think I covered it a bit maybe in the first half, about how it provides for me, I suppose it's got, for personally, it provides that kind of place that I can go watch live sport, enjoy being there, maybe have a pint, maybe not. I'm happy to take my kids to it, and it's something that I kind of, I think that it provides that additional community and that kind of space that's a fun and safe space to be in, and a nice place to be. And I think that then when I think about, and also what does rugby mean for personally? Well, it's completely changed the direction of my life, I suppose, in the life I think about realistically for the last year and a half, and particularly since August this year, where I've always taught. That's what I've done. Being a teacher was kind of what I enjoyed, and I'll be clear. I enjoyed my career until the end in teaching. I didn't leave teaching because I didn't love teaching. I just found something that was too good an opportunity to waste and leave. But yeah, so rugby has completely changed the direction of my life and my career. If I think about what that change has done, then it means that I've gone from rushing the kids out of the house to a breakfast club to arrive there for 7:30 and picking them up at 5:30, most days, to being able to walk. My daughter goes to secondary school now, so there's absolutely no way I'd get away with dropping her anywhere, unless I was wearing a mask and driving someone else's car so I couldn't be identified. But now I get to take my son to and from school every single day and have time that I never appreciated before. That's pretty awesome. So rugby in that sense means that I've got more balance with my family and my family time than I think I ever achieved in my time as a teacher. I sometimes felt I spent a lot more time with other people's kids than I ever stood a chance of spending with mine, and that's no longer true. That's a really good thing. Rugby's given me and through the job and through the work of Star Scheme, which is the rugby world, it's giving me like a lease of life, where it's kind of, I wake up every morning like super excited about what I'm going to do that day with Star Scheme, and what it might bring, and what surprises might kind of wheedle the way out of the woodwork. So that's a hell of a thing to have, right? That what rugby's given me is kind of not a second chance, because that sounds like the first chance wasn't great. I loved education. I'm passionate about education and what it and the right to it and the access to it, and what it does in life. But what rugby's given me is kind of that same love and that same passion to, in a completely different sphere and completely different world. And it's introduced me to some really interesting and like really incredible people. I was bloody amazing at being an educator, and no one ever asked me to go on a podcast. I've been on 2 since I've done this. Dan Cottrell was the first one. So Dan Cottrell's podcast
Dan
was
got there
brilliant.
first, yeah.
We had our
we always
first,
follow after Dan Cottrell for some reason, but
and do you know what? The only thing is that I had less warning about Dan Cottrell than I had about you. So we had our first ever sort of fundraising dinner in September this year, right at the end of September. And it was on a Thursday evening at Ashton Gate Stadium. It was amazing, just absolutely brilliant. Like almost 300 people in the room supporting stuff. Just it was really emotional. Like to think, I stood with Dan, who not Dan Cottrell, but Dan Waller, who started the Star Scheme, and we just kind of stood at one moment and looked around. I was like, look what we've done. Like Christ. But anyway, we had that. So in like 2 o'clock in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, drove home, and I went to bed, and my wife sort of open half an eye. How was it? It's like just unreal. So the next morning we got back together as the sort of the Star gang to kind of what have we learned, what do we know went well. So that was a meeting at about 9:30, I think, and it's kind of finished at about 11:15. And Dan Waller said, "Right, what are you doing at 11 o'clock?" I was like, I don't know, not much if I'm honest. I'm pretty. He's like, "Oh, good, we're doing a podcast," and oh, you mean in like 11 o'clock in 15 minutes? Like, yeah, we're doing a podcast. And that's how we went into Dan Cottrell. So, like I said, all that time in education, no one invited me on a podcast. I've done 2 since doing the Star Scheme. And then when I think about what does rugby mean like for Star Scheme? Well, like it's the vehicle that enables us to be part of the transformation for some of the most vulnerable young people and families that are in our society. And it's not a hallmark card moment. Like it's genuinely what rugby and the Star Scheme are doing, and it's like to be a part of that. Well, that's just frankly incredible. So yeah, rugby. What does rugby mean to me? Is quite a lot. Is probably the honest answer. Although I'd just like to, remind everyone that I'm an outstanding coward and fairly useless at playing the game.
Really good answer, Christian. I'm just going to throw another one at you now. What have you learned from rugby that has helped you most?
Overcoming adversity, and I don't mean that as just a flick back to the Star Scheme. Although obviously there's a clue there as to why rugby is the platform the Star Scheme works in. That in rugby, and let's going back to that thing, James, about really enjoying attritional rugby. Like attritional rugby is a victory over adversity, and if it's really good, it's like adversity from lots of levels, right? The skill and the physicality of the opposition, it's providing that attritional defensive or attritional rugby within the rules of the game, which takes the rules of the game sometimes are the biggest adversity in and around the ruck and maul, aren't they? And the personal discipline that takes, but also to overcome and score a try following 7 or 8 phases of rolling around on the ground and trying to produce something magical for me is almost more enjoyable to watch or to witness than that kind of length of the field run, because length of the field run is about an individual, maybe 2 or 3 individuals who've kind of done something outstanding, which is always to be celebrated. But I guess maybe it comes from my views that led me to being a teacher, that the attritional rugby and the overcoming adversity together. There's something about the togetherness of attritional rugby that I really, really enjoy. Like it's at its best when it's a 15-man defence, right? As sad as I might be, I like nothing more than seeing a good 7. And it's the great thing about being a Bears fan is that when it goes well, you get to see quite a lot of this of, prolonged lengths of time in your own 22, tackle after tackle, rucks, more, that attritional stuff that just takes every member of the team to be part of it. And I think that's what, the value of that, and that as a value is what rugby's taught me, that, that no matter what the adversity, no matter what's in your way, with the right support and the right approach and the right knowledge, you can overcome it and you can achieve something that at times would seem almost impossible. I think that's what I've learned from rugby.
that's fantastic. And I agree with you about the defence. Think back, 10, 12 years ago when England were considered to have that white wall of defence, and you kind of don't see forwards, backs, second row huggers. You just see the whole team working together, standing strong, so that they can, and they might not be gaining ground, but they're not losing. They're all
Yeah.
stood together, and they're all, it's
Yeah.
really good, really good. So, what do you what do you hope people get in their daily lives from rugby? Those that play now, what do you hope that people take into their daily lives and use?
I think that, well, I mean, first of all, the physical outlet and the outlet of physicality that rugby provides, I think, is really key. I think for all of us, we all need that connection to physicality, and unless you're kind of playing at the most elite level, you're getting to do that outside. I'm a massive fan of the outside and spend as much time with it as I can. And I think that the benefit that the outside brings to you is important. And you don't really meet many people in rugby who don't love, who don't enjoy standing in a wet, muddy situation, getting freezing cold for a prolonged amount of time. I think that, the love of the outside and the kind of taking forward and hoping that they get that joy of activity and joy of physicality. I hope they take that. But I think really that, I've maybe harped on about it, but I hope that every day they take from rugby that they know they're part of a community, that they know that there's behind them, right, is everything they'll ever need to get through whatever it is they face. I've spoke at a dinner at the Houses of Parliament, which, I was, again, in education, I know it will surprise a lot of people out there. And Leigh, I know you'll be particularly surprised that in my whole time in education, no one invited me to a dinner, and let alone a dinner at the Houses of Parliament. I don't know whether.
Well, that's not one we didn't share with the kids at lunchtime, you mean?
No, yeah. Plenty of reception kids wanted me to sit with them on their table whilst they destroyed fish fingers and chips. And I'm a massive. There wasn't that much difference between that and the Houses of Parliament, if I'm totally honest. But I spoke there, and it was in the beginning of December, so I'd only been, I joined Starscheme as MD and full time as my proper grown up job in August, and at that time we were in one club and we were launching with a couple others. We were exactly what we were supposed to be at that point, right? Fast forward to December, and I'm kind of traveling up on the train to go and, to even say it now, to go and speak at dinner at the Houses of Parliament, that place that you see on TV. And I kind of stood there, and so I was speaking to Dan and a couple of people, and it's one of those key things that you kind of said to remind me, I guess, but just to make sure that I remembered it, that when I stood at the front of that room, and it was with the Matt Ratner Foundation, it was their dinner, and it was to launch the idea of the wonderfully and creatively named Project Croydon. And he said, look, you remember, when you're stood there, you'll be on your own at the front. Who knows how many people will be there. He said, when you stood, you're not on your own. You've got all of the community of Star behind you, and with that comes all of the community of rugby has stood with you, understanding where you're coming from, supporting what you're doing, and all I am is just delivering what that community is doing. I'm just having to be the person that's there, and it's one of the most reassuring things that I think I've ever experienced and felt. It was a room of, I think it was about 45, 50 people, so not massive, and I've done assemblies to hundreds, so maybe scale wise, but I'm ashamed to say that where I was and the occasion was, it definitely hit home. But to know you stood there, do you know what? All of this lot have got my back. They're all with me here to do this, and that community's behind me. That's overwhelming. And that was, I think that's one of the key bits for me.
I've got to say, the amount of excitement and joy you get from your role is amazing. It certainly comes across on the screen here. And it's fair to say that in the short time you've come a hell of a long way, really, with the whole star scheme. When you're talking about stand up and talking in front of the guys at the Houses of Parliament, it's almost like you don't believe it yourself, but you're there, and it's made them. The strides you've made in such a short time are quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that comes from me and Dan very much believe in. We've both sort of taken part in some training in an organisation called Landmark, and we work and believe in this world possibility. Let's work with what's possible and work with that and create a future for the star scheme that is built on what's possible. So when I talk about, our aim is that we'll be in every Premiership region, like the 14, if we just for a moment forget about Wasps and Worcester and what happened there. But the 14 regions, there's still those 14 regions as it will be from September. 14 regions, 20 grassroots clubs, 25 kids at least in each of those clubs, in each of those regions, 7,000 children. Now, we don't say we're going to be there in 10 years,
Yeah.
It's too late. So we say by the end of 3 years from when we started, so this season, next season, the season after, by then, that's what we were going to have done in England. And then we're going to go and do that in Wales and Scotland and obviously Ireland, because they're quite quick and easy to get to. But actually, if I'm entirely honest, like, you know, I'm happy to share this aim and our ambition. But for me, it's not an ambition. It's just I'm sharing with you what our plan is and where we're going to be. That we'll be in every rugby playing nation. Like Star will be in every rugby playing nation doing the work that we do. And I think we can probably get. I'm you know, I mean, Dan Wooler, who set the charity up, who's one of our kind of one of our leads on fundraising, might go a bit white if he listens to this bit. But in 10 years, there's no reason why we can't be in all those countries. No reason whatsoever. It just takes the opportunity, which it's entirely possible we create those opportunities. And then when we're in every rugby playing nation, delivering and supporting Star, and therefore delivering like rugby home to the most vulnerable children in society globally, then we start to, then maybe, we'll think about going into cricket or football or rowing or archery. I've always thought archery would be a fun place to try it. Giving kids with adverse experiences and sometimes interesting behaviour manifestation weapons has got to be the next step, and to really test whether this works.
It's a brave man that takes that decision, I think. But yeah. Is it, Christian, is it fair to say then that the massive driving force for you is knowing now that there are kids missing out that could be getting a huge benefit from rugby?
Yeah. Like I don't know anyone. Maybe it's just the people I know, but I don't know anyone that sits and knows that. For example, in Bristol pre-pandemic, 20,000 kids, or 19,700, but 20,000 kids living in income-deprived households in a city of nearly 400,000 people. 20,000 children. When we're working in London and in the borough, there's like 900,000 children, 700, something like that are living in deprivation and with adversity, like just in London. And when you start to get to those numbers, and when you learn the facts of what happens to those children when they become adults, like a worryingly high proportion of the adult prison population in England will identify as having multiple adverse childhood experiences. So when you know how that's true, you know how that unfolds and how that plays out, then it's back to that phrase no-brainer. You've got to be in action and doing something about that.
Yeah, you're sort of, you're taking it upon yourself to tackle those future problems, really.
Yeah, so my passion, my drive is to meet those kids and reach those kids who we know can benefit from rugby, and shared, the statistics of kids living in income deprivation. I don't know if it recorded, but I said about a worryingly high proportion of the adult prison population in England would identify as having 4 or more ACEs, and it's something that it's near, it's above 80%. And when you start to look at that and know that those children currently living in deprivation have an increased chance of becoming that sort of outcome. Children who encounter multiple adverse experiences are 85% more likely to contract a terminal illness. Their life expectancy is shorter. Like, when you know stuff like that, and that's just not me. That comes from varying researches over the last 30 or 40 years, which are held up in the scientific forum. When you know that stuff is true, when you know that 16 times more likely to attempt suicide, or 8 times more likely to develop depression and all that sort of stuff, then like not doing something is, well, it just doesn't sit with me. There's no way I can't be in action for that. And then what Star Scheme and what in the world of rugby provides is a mechanism which will help to reverse that. For those kids that we're able to engage with. And we're not looking for kids. We've got videos produced and me and in some of our social media stuff. We celebrate the success of all of our kids, and some of those kids are making academy rugby, and that's incredible. What an amazing thing. If we achieve the ambition, when we achieve the ambition of those 7,000 kids, and we roll that for a few years, we're going to turn out some first team Premiership players. Just by statistically, it's likely, right? When we go globally, an international rugby player is not unimaginable. from what we're doing. But that'll be incredible. And like, the minute that the first star kid walks out onto a first team, I'll be an emotional wreck to think, rugby's done that, right? Rugby, knowing what that kid could have been. Look what we're working with some current professionals for whom this story is true. For whom their story is the Star Scheme child story. We just didn't exist when they were lucky to have someone who did what we did for them when it's their local rugby club, essentially, is what's done, right? So that would be incredible. But what our ambition is that, part of our ambition, the drive for me is knowing that we work with whichever community rugby club from wherever, and we put a kid in at 7 years old through the Star Scheme, and they get the support and the care and the nurture and the provision that rugby provides and the Star Scheme supports to it. And that, fast forward that 20 years and that child's rocking out for the first or the seconds in that community club. Like, that's success, right? That kid's got rugby. That person has rugby. And that, then maybe you roll it forward another 15 years, or depending on how badly injured they become or what the hell the tackling rule is back by then, then they're starting to coach and they're a leader in that community of rugby. That they, you take that child who didn't have rugby and had no access to it and provide it, and they turn into a leader of that community of rugby, and hopefully a leader in their community wider and beyond rugby. That's the success we're after. We celebrate everything all of our young people do, and in the rugby community, we love nothing more than knowing that one of the children from our rugby community has gone on to become a professional, to be involved in elite pathways. Like, what an incredible thing, because it gains the plaudits it deserves. But for me, when I'm older, greyer, and even more tired out, to be able to attend a local grassroots rugby game, to go and watch Chew Valley firsts in a few, however many years' time, and know that, all right, those 4 are all star kids that we introduced to the game, and now look at them. That'll be absolute gold.
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to have to say we're about out of time. Not more for the fact that I'm absolutely nervous as hell that the internet's going to crash and we won't get this recording. I'm desperate to get this recorded. Technology, I'm not a fan of. I just stay with rugby and forget technology. But Christian, thank you ever so much. Thank you for coming on the podcast. A few things that I've got to take away from this. I mean, firstly, I'm already a big fan of Star Scheme. It's something that has always been on my mind to give kids that haven't got that opportunity to get into rugby. Because for me, for Leigh, for all of us that have been involved with the Be More Rugby stuff, and I think I can safely say for probably every member of Wimborne Rugby Club as well, I speak for everybody, we've got such a lot of kids down here in the club now, but we all have benefited from rugby, whether it's here, whether it's other clubs. Some of us have come from other clubs. We've got kids that are involved in it here. The absolute joy for me is to know that there's kids out there that potentially could miss or have missed, that Star Scheme is out there trying to find them, trying to aid them, trying to give them the pathway, trying to put the right clubs in place, so that these kids can have those opportunities and they don't end up the horrendous statistics that you were talking about. But you touched on, that rugby, to use that place where you take your family, it's a safe space, it's a community. You mentioned that it's, you said the phrase rugby home, which I think everybody would really get involved with. But you also said that it's about overcoming adversities together. It's that joint team effort. And as far as I'm concerned, life's tough. If you've got some good friends, good team, good support around you, then it doesn't get any tougher, but you can certainly get over it easier.
Yeah, definitely. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
What about you, Leigh?
Oh, Christian, I think I've said it already, but the passion and drive and excitement that what you're doing, seems to give you is quite infectious. I think that the scheme is a fantastic idea, and it's just not just, that's probably the wrong word, but it's building on what's already happening in the rugby community, right? And helping these other kids and families who would not be necessarily aware that this opportunity exists, trying to line them up and guide them in the right way and put the two and two together, you know. But it's it's a fantastic scheme, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much. I think it's, we like to think we open the door to rugby home, right, for those kids that otherwise don't get it. And then, like you said, it exists, and then rugby does the magic.
Did
And
you write rugby home down, James?
Yeah,
rugby home. We're keeping that one, are we?
Yeah.
All right, we're keeping that one.
I think
Wayne Sanford, Warningham RFC.
Wayne, thank you for rugby home. That's for Wayne.
The beauty.
So, everybody, we've come to the end, and I can't urge people enough. Star Scheme have got an aim of being in the 14 Premiership areas in 2 more seasons' time.
Yeah.
Get on the phone, get on the internet, search them out, get involved. This is about giving kids opportunities to make them better people, to go on to make society a better place, to make the country a greater country, to make the world a greater world, and a great community with this, and obviously 10 years time in all rugby playing countries in the world.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, not just because I fancy visiting Australia, New Zealand, and watching some games over there. That's just coincidental.
I mean, naturally, you're going to have to go there, you know, just to make sure everything's okay and keep an eye on things. You've got to do that, but that's all part
Due diligence, Leigh.
Absolutely.
I've got a responsibility to ensure that what we're delivering is consistent and to the highest quality in all areas of the world.
So everybody, get on the internet, www.starscheme.co.uk or info@starscheme.co.uk, or on all of the social medias, Star Scheme, search it up.
Give us a follow.
Yeah,
it will please my social media people if I say that.
Give them the support that we can as a global rugby community. And I just want to say thank you, Leigh, again for coming on. It's been a pleasure. You're starting to become part of the furniture.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Let's listen to the record. Let's listen to the playback and see what happens. And, you know, a bit of good editing by James, and who never knows what could happen here.
We'll see. And Christian,
we overcame the adversity of the internet from both ends, didn't we?
We certainly did. We certainly did. Christian, say thank you to Georgie for me.
Of course, I will.
And thank you so much for coming on and spending your time.
Well, thank you for the generosity of the offer and the space to talk into. It's been awesome. It's been really good fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Cool. And to everybody that's listened, thank you for listening. If you're enjoying what we're doing, please like and follow. Give us the opportunity to get more guests on to spread this word. Until next time, be more rugby. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, James. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much.